Yeah, no,
Just real quick for the attendees on the meeting tonight, thank you. Welcome for joining us again this week. We will be taking next week, next Tuesday, Election Day off. Please, by all means, go out and vote. And then we will reconvene 2 weeks from tonight to continue going through the guide.
Thank you.
There you go.
Everybody good with that?
Barbara's going to watch the chat again for us tonight, so please feel free to send any messages out in the chat. Although it looks like you guys can unmute yourselves, so feel free also to unmute and chat with us.
Okay. All right, so last week we left off in section 2.2 under scheduling, and we're going to begin at the scheduling instructions. So the type of requested service will determine the scheduling instructions, which range from basic to complex. Basic instructions could be how much time is needed, and complex instructions would pertain to the coordination of rooms, equipment, personnel required, etc. So now if we click each image, I have it up on my computer too, Christy, so you could just, whenever you're clicking, if I'm going too fast, tell me. Many healthcare organizations use automated scheduling systems and build scheduling questions within the system. The scheduling system would prompt the schedule to complete the required instructions based on the test or the procedure that is requested. So they would just, the questions would come up and they would be able to complete them as they were going through based on what was ordered. If the automated scheduling system is not used, a binder including all scheduling instructions should be maintained to facilitate the scheduling process and ensure critical instructions are completed. I think in today's society, most places have the automated scheduling systems, but in the event they don't, you would use the paper binder way. These are just scheduling instruction examples. If you click the clipboard, it'll give you the typical scheduling instructions. We'll just go through quickly. So if you needed a nuclear medicine procedure, it's telling you the list of what you should do here. And if you needed a knee replacement procedure, then you could see how many different instructions are necessary. OR hours, the equipment, the labor, the actual knee, post-surgery and things like that. So if, we're going to go relatively quickly through this, but, these are just giving you examples of types of procedures that would need scheduling and what could have more and what could have less. Moving right along to patient instructions. Scheduled procedures routinely include patient preparation instructions that must be completed prior to the test or procedure. If many of you, like myself, have had surgery or any other procedures, you would know they don't eat past 12, don't do this, don't do that. And then the accurate instructions allow for the service to be done timely. This schedule ensures that the patient will be properly prepared for the service. So if we just click on the boxes, it'll give you the information. Refrain from eating, take all prescription medications on the test day at least 90 minutes prior, drink X amount of liquids, complete, if you have to do any labs prior, and if your doctor's order is not on file, then you need to bring it. So these are types of, and Christy, correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes they'll ask a question on the test like, what is not an example of a patient instruction, or what is an example of patient instruction? So just kind of have these, like if you just make a little note to kind of have these little sticky things available when taking the test, even though they're pretty common. All right, so moving on. Before finalizing the scheduling contact, all components of the scheduling are reviewed and validated. This important step is used to verify that the patient has complete and accurate information. So the following information should be reviewed. So if you click on each number, this is the information that will be reviewed to be finalized. The service that's supposed to be provided, the date and location of the service, not all services are provided where you may have gone to see the doctor initially. Arrival time and procedure time, so those can be two very different things. Verify the patient is clear on the scheduled test time versus the required arrival time. You know, if you get like an MRI with contrast, sometimes you have to drink that terrible drink, so you need to allow yourself an extra hour and so on and so forth. That's what they mean by that. Required pre-service testing, including completion time frame, the preparation instructions, patient arrival instructions, where to park, where to report, and how to get there. So you don't want an angry patient that's lost coming. And then additional patient contact can be expected prior to the service to complete remaining access processing activities. Patients will typically receive additional pre-registration and pre-procedure testing, answer health plan questions, and to complete financial education and resolution. So again, keep this kind of handy and know the 7 steps to review and validate. Okay, what's happening here? Okay. So patient reminders and arrival instructions. The patient reminder is a written listing of the patient's responsibilities and usually includes the same items summarized at the end of a scheduling call, along with any additional instructions provided. So if we just click each number, the screen's a little bit delayed from what I am, but I apologize. You guys may, oh, there we go. So if we click each number, reminder letters can also include maps that show the patient where to park, where to report, and where the service department is located. Many facilities call the patient a day or two to remind them of the appointment. And these notices may be used to reduce the incidence of no-shows and noncompliance with testing instructions. Moving along, order requirements. Tests and services can only be provided with a valid physician order. Now, I know that that's 100%, sometimes a test question. It'll say something along the lines of tests and services can only be provided with, and it'll give you the choices. The answer is with a valid physician order. You have to have a valid physician order in order for the service to be provided. Initially, verbal orders can be taken as long as they are accepted by qualified staff as defined in the facility's medical staff bylaws, rules, and regulations. So if we click the image, here's your checklist for order requirements. Verbal orders must be authenticated by the ordering physician by subsequent written signature, fax signature, or computer signature. CMS will permit the use of a rubber stamp in the case of an author with a physical disability as long as the author can provide proof. There are a few exceptions where a physician's order is not required, and patients, including those with Medicare and other health plans, can request a flu vaccine, pneumonia vaccine, or a screening mammography without an order. And then here's a list of what Medicare requires in relation to data elements before considering a physician order valid. So it's, and again, this may be a question, what is an element or what is not an element that needs to be on an order. So it's your patient's full name, full legal name, the date it was written, the test, the diagnosis, name of the ordering physician or allied health professional, and then the signature of the physician.
This is one of those slides where I would tell you, you may want to do a screenshot and just have it on hand to refer back to. In this second point, you know, the few exceptions where physician order is not required, think about services you could get at a local pharmacy. You know, you could walk into any pharmacy right now, get a flu vaccine. You know, a lot of your insurances will cover the pneumonia vaccine. A screening mammography is covered. I've seen a lot of times a question around which of the following requires a physician order, and I think the answer then is if it's a diagnostic test. But this slide in general, you know, I hate to tell people to memorize things, but you just may want to have something back to refer to for this particular slide, because there are a number of questions that come out of these 3 points.
And just, you know, another note, because obviously we're, you know, to a certain degree teaching to the test, but as a compliance officer, you cannot bill if you do not have a valid order. And a valid order has to have the date, it's got to have the diagnosis, it's got to have all those elements. So, you know, hopefully in your areas, whether it's computer generated or not, you have to have those orders. And if you don't, you can't bill for whatever service that was.
All right. Additional order requirements. Looks like those little bubbles. These are just additional. They're not necessarily, you don't have to have them. The physician address and telephone number, the NPI number. So if you just click on these little bubbles, patient date of birth, patient sex, social security number, and patient demographic and health plan information. These aren't technically required for an order, but they could be on there. And some more information. Additional information also could include the CPT code, the scheduling department, the hours of operation, and required pre-procedure testing. Barbara, at any point when I get to the ABNs, if you could jump in and help, that would be great.
Sure.
All right. So medical necessity screening and ABN process. Medicare and other health plans will only pay for tests and services that are determined reasonable and necessary. Medicare has established guidelines called the local coverage determinations, also known as the LCD, and the national coverage determinations, which is the NCD. And they're used to determine which diagnosis, signs, or symptoms are payable. So if you are familiar with Medicare, you may get a denial, and then you look up the LCD or NCD and see if there's any other diagnoses that would fit based on the medical record. So if you click the arrows, if a test is ordered where an LCD or NCD exists, there must be documentation of medical necessity in order for Medicare to pay for the service. If the service is not deemed medically necessary by Medicare, the provider must inform the patient prior to service and utilize a specific form, which is the Medicare Advanced Beneficiary Notice of Non-Coverage, to document the patient was informed. That's also known as your ABN. The health plans have their own medical policies that outline the services that are considered payable. And if the provider is considered a participating provider and has an active contractual agreement with the plan, the health plan may require them to inform the patient prior to service it's not considered medically necessary by the health plan. And some health plans will also require written documentation that the patient was informed that the service is not covered and that there's what the reasonable cost would be. So here we will talk about the ABN. What does an ABN look like? If you click on that, this is an example of what the ABN looks like, and it's used as a means of written communication from the provider to the patient. And this is required for Medicare recipients.
And you have to use this form, and you have to use the font they have. You know, it has to be exact. This is not a form that you can adjust.
Right. And the purpose of the ABN is to give the patient advance notice that Medicare may not pay for the test or service ordered, the reason the test or service may not be covered, and the associated costs, which will be billed to the patient. So you have to tell them what their out-of-pocket expense will be for the service that they're going to receive.
And you have to tell them the reason the test will not be covered. Now, most of the time it's medical necessity, but you do have to tell them the reason the test is not covered.
Right. And it needs to be issued it must be issued to the patient before providing the service to give the patient an opportunity to make an informed decision about whether to receive the service or not. So you can't then have the patient sign it afterwards because it needs to be done before they are there for the service. Generic, routine, and blanket ABNs are not acceptable. To Barbara's point, it has to be this specific form, except in cases such as frequency limitations where all patients are at risk.
Because when ABNs kind of first started, a lot of hospitals just kind of did a blanket ABN and said, Medicare may not pay for this test, you know, sign here. But you can't do that. Every test needs to have the specific cost, the specific reason, and, you know, it can't be, you know, maybe they're not going to pay.
Barbara, what happens if you don't get an ABN and the claim is denied for medical necessity?
If you can justify that, you know, the patient refused to sign the ABN, but I mean, you really should tell the patient if they won't sign, you're not going to do the test. You know, because there's a modifier that you put on the claim that indicates the ABN was signed. I mean, I think if you put patient refused to sign and you had it witnessed by 2 people, but the whole idea of this is to give the patient the option to not have the test. And it's a very tricky thing. You know, if the patient really needs the test, you know, a lot of places will call the physician, and, you know, you have to be very careful how you word it, because, you know, there has to be documentation that the diagnosis is there. You can't just pick one off the list. They can be very tricky, and they've been around for a long time. And they're kind of like Medicare secondary questionnaires. You know, people kind of take them for granted, and they don't really do them. But your hospital will lose money if, you know, your hospital will lose money if, you know, you don't have it signed, because if you don't have it signed, you can't bill the patient.
And that's the key. If your ABN is not signed, or if you, or if any of it's incorrect, you cannot hold your patient liable for that.
Right.
If you put down there, and if you put down there that the patient's going to owe you $10, but you run it through and the patient really owes you $100, you're going to be held to that $10. You're going to be held to what you put on that form.
Right.
Right. So when is an ABN needed? I clicked the arrow, Christy, for that one. With any service delivered, providers must decide which one of the following 3 conditions apply in order really to properly inform Medicare beneficiaries. So excluded items and services, there's no required notice. Items and services expected to be denied reimbursement, notice must be supplied. And then items or services presumed to be a Medicare benefit, no notice requirements, provider expects to receive payment from Medicare.
Right. So most hospitals now have software that they run through, and, you know, again, Medicare could deny something for some other reason, but, you know, if the diagnosis is a medically necessary diagnosis, you can, you know, you don't need the ABN. The other thing is when they say excluded services, like dental, you know, dental is not covered by traditional Medicare. I know with, you know, Medicare Part C now, you know, a lot of them have it, but you don't need to get an ABN for that. If it's something that is statutorily not covered by Medicare, then you don't need an ABN, and you can bill the patient.
To the extent possible, in billing Medicare, providers should split claims so that one of these 3 conditions holds true for all items and services billed on a single claim. That approach should improve the understanding of potential liability for all parties.
Christina, I don't think I'm with you.
I'm with you now. Oh. I go back one.
What is needed on an ABN? Click. We've done that. Was this the page?
Keep going. Hit the green arrow. Keep going. One more. One more. Then we'll be, yep, right there. So some Medicare payment policies for outpatient service groups or bundle several items or services into a single unit for payment. And ABN has to apply to all items or services bundle or none at all. So that means the entire bundled unit must be billed as non-covered or none billed at all. Therefore, as long as part of a bundled service is certain to be covered or medically necessary, billing the entire bundled service as covered is appropriate. Okay. Medicare limits how much it pays for an individual's medically necessary outpatient therapy services in one calendar year. These limits are called therapy caps or therapy cap limits. So for PT and speech language pathology services combined, the limit on incurred charges is $1,960 in 2016. For occupational therapy or OT services, the limit was also $1,960 in 2016. So their Medicare will only pay out a certain amount. So if the patient goes beyond that, an ABN would be required. But I do believe that there's a certain modifier that could be billed or condition code to prove medically necessary services, and Medicare would have to approve it. So there are ways around it, but for the testing purposes, this is what you should focus on.
And I would not focus on the dollar amounts so much.
Right.
It's really just understanding that Medicare limits how much it pays for services and outpatient therapy services. So that's really the point here. Not so much this 2016 figure of $1,900.
Okay. An ABN is not used for inpatient services. The inpatient counterpart to the ABN is the hospital issued notice of non-coverage, also known as the HIN. Oh, we have a question. How does the ABN come into play for balanced billing?
Well, if Medicare pays for the service, obviously you can balance bill the patient. If you don't get an ABN signed, I believe that you can bill the patient for what their copay would have been, just like when you do contracted services, you can bill them for the contracted amount. You can't bill them for the whole amount. But if it is truly, a co-insurance, it means they've paid.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
the whole idea around the ABN is that you suspect Medicare is not going to cover their service, and usually it is based on the patient not having the needed diagnosis code. So ABN typically won't come into play when you're balance billing. If you're billing, because once Medicare processes and pays, you can either bill the next payer or submit to the patient.
But if Medicare denies it for, because you didn't get the ABN signed, a lot of times you can't bill the secondary insurance.
That is true.
Right.
Especially Medicaid.
Yes.
So it's very important to get the ABN signed when it does apply.
Good question.
Great question.
Okay, so the inpatient counterpart is known as the HIN and should be provided to beneficiaries prior to admission, at admission, or at any point during the inpatient stay if the hospital determines that the care the beneficiary is receiving is or about to receive is not covered. So if we click each number, it'll give you the reasons they may not be covered. So it could be considered medically unnecessary, not delivered in the most appropriate setting, or custodial in nature.
Yeah, and the not delivered in the appropriate setting, that's when you want to go into an alternative level of care. And, a lot of times if, the patient can't be placed and you're making efforts to get it placed, you can appeal that there wasn't a safe discharge, but you've got to have good documentation that shows that you've made every effort to discharge that patient appropriately.
All right.
Hello, Harry. Hello?
Someone must have came in there. Thought he was being attacked. All right. So, can we mute
Harry
him on our?
probably wants to mute.
Yeah. Okay. So what must appear on the ABN? Medicare has an approved form. It was released in mid-2011. And just, I didn't read it out loud, but just jot down that that's the form number, CMS R131. Sometimes they throw those in there. You'll see it along with like what's a 1500 and a UB in their name. So just jot that down somewhere that that's the Medicare approved form number. It was released in mid-2011. It includes specific language and information that must be used. The form must list the specific service the physician ordered. I think Christy may have pointed that out earlier. It has to have the specific service that the physician ordered, the estimated cost of the service, the date of the service, and the non-covered reasons, and those must be on the ABN. The form also states that Medicare may not pay for the service unless the patient knows if he or she elects to have the service, the patient will be financially responsible.
I mean, the whole idea around this is that you're really notifying your patient before they get the service done that they will be financially responsible after. And this is really an effort to inform your patient so that they're fully aware going in before they get a surprise bill later for $1,200 for a test that they had no idea would not be covered. So the idea is really around trying to protect your patient.
And if you click the, oh, Christy clicked it already, the ABM form, the patient must select one of the three options that indicate his or her preference and sign the ABN. A copy will have to be given to the patient, and the provider will keep the documentation that the patient received and sign the form. If the provider fails when required, the patient cannot be billed for the non-covered service. I'll back to Christy and Barbara's point. If there is no ABN on file, the patient cannot be billed for those medically unnecessary services.
And Barbara, it's only your traditional Medicare patients that need ABNs, right? You don't need them for your Medicare HMO patients?
Correct. Correct.
Okay, we are at our checkpoint. Name the guideline that Medicare established to determine which diagnoses, signs, or symptoms are payable. Anybody want to guess? I don't see it on your, oh, are you there? There we go, moving along. So the answer to this question is local coverage determination.
Okay.
All right, moving along, moving along. We are going to.
All right. Thank you for answering the question in the chat box. We saw it.
Nice job. All right. Whew. We are going to move right along to pre-registration. So the pre-registration purpose and process. So if we click on the first bubble, reasons for pre-registration. Oh gosh, why did it just go away? Here it is. Okay. So pre-registration should be completed for all scheduled patients prior to their arrival for service. There might be a ghost because my screen just keeps moving. Okay. Obtaining the patient's demographic and insurance information prior to service is one of the key steps to ensure accurate and timely billing. Best performance indicator is that 98% of all scheduled patients should be pre-registered. Click the little pencil. Successful pre-registration program identifies clearly what information must be gathered, including the demographic information, insurance data, financial information, reminders, such as your appointment, arrival directions, insurance card, etc. A successful pre-registration program also would identify the potential need for financial assistance and provide staff with the opportunity to give patients that information. And moving to the benefits of pre-registration. So the process of pre-registration ensures that patient access staff will have complete and valid information to finalize the remaining pre-access activities, including the Medicare secondary payer screening, medical necessity screening, insurance verification, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where you would do your pre-authorizations or pre-certifications or authorizations, managed care requirement resolutions, and any financial education or resolution that you can do at that time.
And you can also do the ABN at this time. At least the patient knows when they come in to expect to sign it. You know, most places, you know, don't have electronic signature for the patient or whatever, but at least if you go over the ABN and tell them, it gives them the opportunity to know when it comes in so that your patient access staff isn't, you know, bombarded with the patient saying, I didn't know about it or whatever.
Right.
I think it's interesting that a lot of providers, I think, struggled with some of this pre-registration issues, but since COVID occurred and kind of really hit the healthcare industry hard, almost everybody now has a great pre-registration program because they want to get all of that information so that they limit the time you spend at the facility itself. So it's really interesting that we've had a big shift to try to get as much information up front as possible, just to, you know, create a better experience for the patient.
Right. And in addition, pre-registration ensures that the patient arrival process is completed efficiently with minimal patient flow delays, since all the paperwork, both financial and clinical, can be assembled ahead of time. And then those are just some examples of what could possibly be done. Data collection. The purpose of the initial pre-registration step is to identify if the patient has been a previous patient, has an existing MPI number. Each patient with a historical record in the facility's registration system is assigned, we went over this, I think, in week 2, a unique identifier, which is the master patient index number. And all the patient information is documented using that number. Many patients have similar names, and the only way to make sure the correct patient record is accessed is to validate using multiple identifiers. So if the patient's record can't be found with the information provided, always ask the patient if she or he had previous services at the facility and check that way. Click the image. Little reminder, you want to make sure you do not generate a duplicate medical record for the patient if she or he is already in the system. To reduce the chance of that occurring, some organizations are beginning to use biometric tools to validate the patient's identity, such as optical fingerprint or palm screening. I haven't been to any place that high tech. Maybe some.
I was just wondering the same thing. Has anybody seen that?
I'm trying to think. There was I think it's NYU. I think NYU had the fingerprint.
Wow.
Because when I was working at Brookdale and we were putting in Epic, we were looking at a lot of different things. And I think it was NYU. I don't know if anybody else, but I do think NYU had the fingerprint for the patients.
Wow. Pretty wild.
It is.
They're right. And there are other Christina Santulos out there that I know personally. So, I mean, it's not really a common name, but it really is. So you just have to, you know, make sure that the patient in front of you is the patient record that you're looking at.
The best question to ask the patient when they are in front of you is, have you ever been here before? Because that's the question they'll answer, and they'll say, yeah, I was here. Then you can start drilling in if you can't find it. Did you have a different name? Have you gotten married? You know, did you use a middle initial? But if you ask them if they've been there before, then you know that you want to search a little harder and not create a duplicate medical record number.
Right. So consequences of improper data collection. So serious consequences may occur if patients are identified incorrectly via the generation of a duplicate medical record. So there, you could have the wrong medical history, billing information is not correct, or an incorrect medical record, and then the medical services are being added to the wrong patient account. So it's, you know, and again, with the wrong medical history, I know we touched on this in the weeks prior, but if patient has serious adverse reactions to a treatment for allergies, or, you know, something were to happen to the patient because you pulled up the wrong one, that's very, very serious. So we just always need to make sure we have the correct patient. And then MPI and data collection. So the first critical step for all patients arriving for services, scheduled or unscheduled, is verifying the patient's identification. So if we click the highlighted fields, it'll tell you last name, first name, middle name, and then also, and the date of birth. And then you would want the social security number. And then once identification is validated, remaining registration processing is completed based on pre-registered or unscheduled status.
You know, the social security number is becoming more and more sticky these days, and I know a lot of providers are actually, there's an effort not to collect patient social security numbers. Even Medicare is migrating their policy numbers so that they're no longer the patient's social. So your organization may or may not be collecting that at this point. If they are, they may be screening it or hiding usually the first 5 digits sometimes, and you may only see the last 4. But that's increasingly becoming a field that people are very hesitant about turning over.
Right, and I don't know how many of you are on newer systems. I know like Epic, it won't even show the full social. It only shows the last 4 no matter where you are in the system. And I know other systems are moving towards that. I know Cerner is the same way. You can't actually see the entire social. So it is, to Christy's point, becoming less and less. I mean, I haven't been asked for mine at a doctor's office in a very long time. So it's, I mean, for testing purposes, it's on here, but in reality, it may be something you don't have to do. All right, so scheduled patients and pre-registered patients will have completed comprehensive access processing prior to their date of service. The comprehensive access activities include identifying the patient, creating a registration record, completing the medical necessity screening, determining the insurance eligibility, obtaining the benefits, et cetera, et cetera. Express check-in should be established for scheduled and pre-registered patients, either in a designated area or within the service department. Because pre-service processing has been completed, the only remaining registration steps include confirming the positive patient identification, activating the record, placing the armband with the correct identification, and obtaining signatures and finalizing a financial obligation.
So again, this is one of those slides that has a lot of packed data, but whenever you see lists like these comprehensive access processing activities include, and you see a number of answers here, that should be a clue that could potentially be a question. And I have seen a question out of both this top and bottom paragraph. And again, I'm not suggesting memorize it, but you know where to find it in case if the question comes up.
Okay. For new patients with no NPI number, a new medical record will be generated. So if you click the box to discover the minimum information, so the red box, it's the patient's full name again, the legal name, first name, last name, middle initial, minimum requirements, sex, also known as gender, and then the orange boxes are additional information. So social security number is listed as additional information. And then the date of birth is a requirement as well. A predefined data set should be obtained, validated, or updated for all scheduled patients as part of pre-reg. The data set ideally would be provided electronically from the physician's office. If the data set cannot be obtained electronically, the patient provides the data during a telephone contact or preferably via the internet. Okay, so comprehensive registration data collection. Let's just click these bubbles. Do they change? Yeah, they change. Okay. Complete patient demographic information. Again, this is your full name, address, date of birth, social, sex, race, marital status, et cetera, et cetera. So that is part of the patient demographics. Then you'd want the complete guarantor information if the guarantor is not the patient. You want the complete health plan information, primary, secondary, tertiary, if applicable, health plan name, the claim submission address, ID number, plan group name. That's typically on the card, or if you pull the eligibility electronically or through a clearinghouse, through a, whatever you, I'm losing the word. But if you run it through an insurance verification software and it spits it out, all that information should come. And then you can just fill that in.
And it's important to not like ask questions like, have you moved? Or, you know, you have to either have them say, where do you live? And then validate it's what you have, or read it to them and say, do you still live at 10 White Oak Acres? But a lot of people go, has anything changed? That doesn't work.
Right.
I mean, one of the biggest fears patients have when they come seeking care is that they're going to get a bill and they're going to be expected to pay a large amount of money. So it really is better to ask them, like Barbara said, where do you live, and make them tell you, otherwise you will get bad information.
Right. And I was guilty of it myself. I mean, I moved and I never changed it at one of my doctors, and, you know, they said, do you still live in White Plains? And I just said yes, because I just didn't feel like changing it. And then I was like, I'll just change it online when I get the bill. But I didn't get the bill because I don't live there. So, you know, you have to make sure that you update everything. I do get things electronic, so I knew I had a bill, so I did pay it and fix it. But you know, just make sure that you're asking in a way that they will answer you back. All right, so complete insurance information if insured is different from the patient. So name, address, date of birth, etc. And then an emergency contact, name, address, you know, God forbid there's an emergency when the patient's there, there's an emergency contact on file. Validation of data. Historical data should always be validated as part of the pre-registration process, since patients can change residencies, change insurance, change employers, etc. Access staff should not read the file data out loud to the patient. Similar to Barbara's point, the most accurate way to validate is to have the patient provide the information to you. Asking the patient to provide data eliminates the possibility that the patient simply agrees without listening. I know in a lot of places now they give you like the iPad, and all your information comes up, and if you need to fix it, it gives you the option to edit it. So they're kind of not even making you say it to them and stand there. You do it all on your own, so it's right there. You obviously see it's wrong, and then you can just quickly edit it. So I know that some providers are shifting in that way to make it easier for the patient to enter the information. And then they kindly ask you to pay at the end of that whole thing with a credit card. So that's how you pay your copay at the same time. Okay, so the purpose of insurance verification. Insurance verification is conducted to ensure accuracy of the health plan information. Coverage issues are identified and communicated to the patient. This sets the stage for completion of financial education and account resolution based on deductibles, co-insurance, or other coverage limitations. So if we click on the little numbers, a little ahead. So step 1, confirm the patient's eligibility for benefits under the identified plan. Number 2, identifying and documenting the patient's health plan benefits. Note benefit determination may or may not be available through the eligibility contact. For self-insured plans, the employer may maintain that eligibility. Sequencing plans involved in a coordination of benefits, so COB situations, so the primary, secondary, and tertiary plans are correctly recorded and billed. Recording patients' out-of-pocket liabilities such as deductibles, copays, coinsurance percentages, and coverage limitations. The patient's maximum out-of-pocket liability, pre-authorization or pre-certification requirements, and referring the patient for financial counseling or financial assistance as necessary. So this could be one of those slides where I know it's kind of annoying in the numbers, but just like kind of mark it down because there may be a question related to the numbers 1 through 7. Okay, I'm hitting next, but it's very slow.
I got methods of insurance verification. I'm clicking the top box. Now it's coming up with more bullets.
Oh, here we go. All right, I got it. My internet here in the office is very slow now too. Okay, here we go. So methods of insurance verification. Insurance verification can be completed electronic, web portal, or telephone contact. Most major health plans, including Medicare and Medicaid, offer electronic and/or web portal verification. Electronic is obviously the fastest and most cost-effective and efficient way to complete the verification. Electronic verification may be automated through the registration system with an optional upload of the health plan's response. Some of you may see that in your own internal systems. You can upload it and it's in the patient account in the notes or wherever it may be stored that it was run, the patient's eligible, and this is the out-of-pocket expense. And insurance verification may also be initiated manually via the health plan's website, which I know we do. Some of it, if we get an account that's denied, we just manually look up one account if it's just one account. Telephone verification contact can occur in 2 ways. So the health insurance plan may offer an automated feature that allows the caller to provide the patient's information, or you can talk to somebody. Alternatively, the payer's insurance representatives obtain the patient's identifying information, and it identifies the patient and verbally provides the eligibility status. To me, that's the most challenging one because it's usually so-and-so spoke with so-and-so, patient eligible, no off required, but no authorization really is required. So sometimes those are a little bit challenging. So click on the next box. Why is it going so slow? Okay. So Medicare secondary payer screening, also known as the MSP. For Medicare patients, an important component of the pre-registration process is the effective completion of the MSP.
Hey, Christina.
And there's
I think you skipped a whole section on HIPAA, the 270 healthcare eligibility and health. Yeah.
So if you remember when I was talking about HIPAA, HIPAA privacy has, obviously taken over whenever you talk about HIPAA. But HIPAA was originally created for all of these electronic files that we're so used to now, 837, 835, 270s, 271. And, the real intent of HIPAA was to help reduce the administrative burden and costs. And, it hasn't worked perfectly, as most things never do, but it is a piece of HIPAA that you kind of forget. So on the test, there may be some questions about HIPAA with regard to 835s or 270s. And you just need to remember that that is in the HIPAA regulation about those electronic transmissions.
And I could tell you, I've seen specifically a question around what was enacted in 1996 in an effort to reduce administrative costs. And you'll see HIPAA, EMTALA, the Affordable Care Act, something else. And then in that case, you would be looking for HIPAA. So HIPAA, it has been around for a while. It's one of the older laws now, reduce administrative costs. And it was really, Barbara's right, it was an effort to standardize the transmission of data between payers and providers.
It is not just a privacy law.
That's true.
So oddly enough, I don't have those.
Okay, so Christine, I'll read these really quick.
Right.
The first file batch they talk about here is your 270 file, and that's your transaction outbound. I have never seen anything on the 270 file, but your file numbers, those 270, the 837s, 835s, I don't know that it's super critical to know those. They are something you could Google pretty quickly. So again, not necessarily something to memorize. But just be aware that these files are assigned numbers. So your 270 file, that is your transaction file that contains the patient's eligibility. The 271 file, that is the response file that you get from the insurance company that will explain, what the patient's covered for and not covered for. And then we get into the Medicare secondary payer screening. So I think that's where you are, right, Christina?
Yeah, it's very strange that I don't have those others, but I don't.
All good.
All right, so yeah, okay, that's exactly all. That's all I have, just that. Okay, anyway. All right, so for Medicare patients, an important component of the pre-registration process is the effective completion of the MSP. And the basic MSP rules are discussed in course 1.6. So they were in the first week. You could always refer back to them. But for patient access staff, understanding both the MSP rules and how to ask the questions are essential. Facilities have developed computerized MSP forms that guide staff through the required questions. So I know that there are systems. I know that Cerner, when you're registering anybody for Medicare, it automatically takes you to the MSP and makes you fill it out before you can even complete the registration. So there is software out there that will guide you with the questions.
And keep in mind that, patients have the options to go into Medicare, but sometimes the whole idea of the Medicare secondary payer is that the patient's primary coverage is not Medicare. You may have a patient who's still working and has primary coverage through their employer, and Medicare would be secondary. So it's for those scenarios that we have those questions, and those questions are really designed to ask the patient to get the information from the patient so that you can identify who's your primary payer, who's your secondary payer, things like that.
And it really needs to be done every time. If a patient comes in and they have a car accident, Medicare is not primary.
That's right.
Next time they come in for their lab work, Medicare is primary. So they, if you notice, there's this little word in that first paragraph about effective completion. And to Christina's point, the electronic ones, I'm telling you, I see it all the time. Yes, yes, no, 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 no. You have to explain to the patients because they don't understand when Medicare is not primary. Once they get their Medicare card, they think that's, their free ticket to ride. So, patient access staff understanding what that really means is really important, and they really need to be completed, correctly and accurately, and, not just zip through all the questions.
Right. And audits of MSP forms often reveal data inconsistencies, which can be eliminated if the staff communicates effectively with the Medicare patient. Therefore, completing the MSP form after completing the pre-registration or registration contact with the patient is not an appropriate screening technique. Each question should be asked using terminology and phrases that are easy for the patient or beneficiary to understand. And it's also important to recognize if the patient is hearing impaired or otherwise not able to provide accurate information.
You know, like, don't ask the patient, are you working aged? I mean, they don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, are you still working is the way you ask it.
Right. So that the screening questions help clarify if the patient's situation is working age, disability, end-stage renal disease, or an accident liability. And if we click the logo. So now it's going to go into, I'm not going to read every single one in the sense of time, but it'll, just read through like what working aged is. So it's got provisions that are designed to determine if the patient or the patient's spouse is employed. And then disability, it'll screen if the patient is on disability. And then end-stage renal disease, the beneficiary may become eligible for Medicare because of the existence of end-stage renal disease. And then it'll tell you here that after the 30-month coordination period, Medicare becomes the primary payer. And then accident liability. Screening for liability situations involves asking if the current services are in any way related to an accident, including work-related or possibly auto-related. All right, so moving to incomplete pre-registration. This could result in return mail affecting the ability to contact the patient to collect self-pay accounts, insurance denials, which I'm sure most of us are very familiar with. So it's missing or invalid information, ineligible on the date of service, no authorization, not medically necessary, coverage limits met. I'm sure we've seen them all. Unnecessary health plan follow-up and rebilling resulted in higher rework costs. And then here's an example of the pre-registration process not completed and then resulted in the incremental cost. So you see here on the left side, it was completed, and then the net income was $125 for the facility. On the right-hand side, it was not completed, and it shows you how much it costs to do the rework, and then the net income for the facility was $75. And then here we will talk about the cost of a denied claim. So in the example, you can see that if the claim is not submitted correctly, reimbursement is always affected, regardless whether the claim can be rebilled for additional reimbursement or not. When pre-registration is executed to ensure that all required pre-access is completed, it'll say the facility earned $125. Then it's reworked, analyzing the denial, requesting the information, resubmitting it, reviewing the notes, whatever you have to do in order to get that claim paid, and it reduced dramatically to $75 according to that little picture. All right, checkpoint. Let's see. What is the purpose of insurance verification? Anybody want to guess? Sorry, I'm frozen again. I'm moving. I'm all, Christy, my thing is frozen. I don't know if you want to select it. I can't even see it.
So it's to ensure the accuracy of the health plan information. Insurance verification, you're trying to verify the insurance coverage.
No, let me see. And then your key points to remember are next. Oh, this computer. Nothing works after 6 here. The internet, the heat, the hot water.
Now on you can come to my place. I got state of the art internet.
I
Just
might.
not to take a
I might.
bath.
Right. Whew. All right, so we'll probably finish up with health plans, but I'm not gonna like read every single thing. I think a lot of us are probably familiar with these health plans, but we will start. Okay. So, all right. So many people under age 65 receive health insurance through an employer. Others buy their own insurance through individual insurance markets or the insurance marketplace, also known as the exchange, created by the Affordable Care Act. And in addition, there are federal and state health insurance programs available for qualifying individuals. So we're going to start with Medicare. So Medicare is a government-sponsored program which is financed through taxes and general revenue funds. Tricare, formerly known as Champus, is a healthcare program for the United States Department of Defense Military Health Systems. The Indian Health Services, an agency within the Department of Health and Human Services responsible for providing federal health services to Native Americans. Back to Christy's memorization point, you could probably Google the meaning, but you may get questions that say which health plan is, and it'll give you, the definition, and you'll just need to know. But, don't get hung up on trying to memorize what every single one is. Medicaid is a federally aided state-operated program to provide health and long-term care coverage for low-income individuals or families.
Can I just say for Medicaid, I'm not sure a lot of people always recognize this. Federally funded, state administered. And this right here is a question I have seen on the test. So how they list it here, federally aided, state operated.
Yeah, that was on my test exam for the CHFP too.
Oh, good.
For my, practice exam, because I haven't taken it yet.
Oh man, I thought you took the real one.
I'm getting there. Managed care plans, comprehensive health care plans that attempt to reduce costs through contractual agreements with providers through care management initiatives. Commercial indemnity plans cover almost all services without authorization requirements. Blue Cross Blue Shield brands are the nation's oldest and largest family of health benefits. That's sometimes a question too. Who is the largest and oldest family of health benefit companies and the most recognized in the health insurance industry? Self-insured plans are self-funded plans where the cost of medical care are borne by the employer on a pay-as-you-go basis.
And a lot of hospitals have self-insured plans.
And liability coverage, an auto, home, or business insurance plan may include medical coverage clause that covers individual healthcare services related to an accident or injury, and healthcare facilities bill liability claims when the healthcare services are a result of that accident or injury.
Yeah, liability. If you see liability, think workers' comp, think no fault, think that's going to be accident related or related to like a homeowner's policy. All of those policies list how much they will cover for healthcare services related to accidents.
Right. All right. So now we're going to look at Medicare and Medicaid just a little closer. So Medicare is your insurance program that features unique from other health plans. It's government sponsored and financed through taxes. So there's 4 different types of Medicare. So Medicare Part A are your benefits that provide coverage for inpatient hospital services, skilled nursing, or home health. Part B is for your outpatient and professional service coverage, but the beneficiary must pay a monthly premium for the additional Part B coverage. Part C is known as your Medicare Advantage. So that's when a patient may take out, Aetna Medicare or United Healthcare Medicare as opposed to having traditional Medicare. And that includes Part A and B. Some of it, and here Part D is the prescription drug coverage. Sometimes the Part C will cover it, sometimes it won't. So it just depends on the patient's policy. Okay, so Part A benefits, I'm not going to read the whole thing. So just there's benefit periods in the Medicare Part A, and the beneficiary, if the beneficiary remains in the same benefit period until he or she is hospitalization free or skilled nursing care free for 60 consecutive days. Okay, so there are some questions related to this, not many, but just sometimes they go with the benefit period. So it's the benefit period, the patient must be hospitalization free for 60 consecutive days. A deductible is due each time the beneficiary is readmitted after remaining hospital free for the 60 consecutive days. And then after the 60 days are used, the beneficiary has 30 coinsurance days. So the beneficiary uses coinsurance days. It's a daily out-of-pocket expense. That's 25% of the current deductible amount. And then after 60 full and 30 coinsurance days, there's the lifetime reserve days. Those are known as the LTR.
And guys, again, I have to be honest with you, I wouldn't memorize this.
No.
There used to be questions about this. I think the test kind of pulled back and really getting into some of the weeds about the Medicare Part A benefits. I think for the testing purposes, it's really more important to know the difference between Medicare Part A, Part B, Part C, and D. I wouldn't worry about getting too much into the weeds on this slide. This is more detail than they really get into.
Right. So I won't spend much time on this. Just on your own, just go through and read so that you learn about it.
And as somebody with a mother in a nursing facility right now, I find this slide extremely interesting and helpful for me. So, so there is some real practical purpose and whatnot here that you can probably apply to your life at some point, unfortunately. But again, this is kind of in the weeds. And these are regulations that can always be looked up if you need to.
But familiarize yourself with this. I mean, the real spirit of the CRCR is to have our revenue cycle people educated so that if patients or their families are asking questions like, my mother's been here, 60 days, they're handing me this notice, I don't know what it means, that kind of thing. I mean, most of the time it's handled by case management, but the more knowledge you have, the more helpful you can be to your department and your patients.
Right. And then Medicare Part B, it does have an annual deductible. The beneficiary is responsible for the coinsurance payment. So that's more similar to like the insurances you or I would have, where you have coinsurance, you have a deductible, whatever the case is. Coinsurance amounts for services paid under the OPPS, which is the Outpatient Prospective Payment System, and it's determined by federal regulation.
That's just a fancy way of saying CMS puts out a fee schedule and they pay you based on that fee schedule. So the coinsurance, because they have that 20% coinsurance, it's calculated for you.
Right. And then to submit claims to Medicare, hospital inpatient outpatient services are submitted to Medicare and the Medicare Advantage plans electronically using the 837I format. So that's a UBO form, paper form, and physician services are submitted using the 837P, which is the CMS 1500 form. Again, you don't have to memorize those numbers. You can simply Google them, but they do sometimes ask about those forms.
Yeah, I have seen questions on the forms. I mean, a good way to remember it when you think, I always looked at it as 837I. I is an institutional. That tends to be your UB claim form. 837P, professional. That tends to be your physician services, doctor's visits. It could even be drugs and devices, although they could also appear on the institutional bill.
Right. And then the patient's insurance claim number must be provided. So, you know, it's everything we would need to submit a claim needs to be on the claim form. To be eligible for Medicare reimbursement, claims must be filed within 1 calendar year from the date of service. Medicare will reject or deny claims that are not received within the specified time frames. Medicare Advantage plan claims must be filed within the specific health plan's qualifying time limit based on the provider contract. So the Medicare Advantage plans are probably not as generous with a time frame, but it would just follow if you have a contract in place. Otherwise, it would just be what the time frame is for that payer.
And I have seen a question on what's the Medicare filing limit, and in that case, the answer they're looking for is a calendar year. That regulation changed a few years ago, but that is what it is now.
Yep. Medicare claim status: when a claim is received by Medicare or the Medicare Advantage plan, the claim is either paid or denied, and then you will get the EOB, and that's sent to the patient as well. If the beneficiary requested hospital insurance benefits and no payment can be made, that's when the ABN comes into play, and that should have been done already. In instances where the beneficiary receives an EOB or a disallowance letter, the correspondence will include a description of appeal rights and instructions. Okay, come on, computer. Medicaid. Okay. So Medicaid is a federally aided, state-operated and administered program to provide health and long-term care for low-income individuals or families. A state may elect to contract with other health plans to offer one or more Medicaid managed care plans as an alternative to traditional Medicaid. And so eligibility expanded effective January 1, 2014 through a provision of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, as states were provided additional funding. So not every state has elected to expand their Medicaid coverage. So remember, it's state operated and federally aided. So it's state and federal. So each state has different rules. They're not all the same.
I know we talked about this test is at a federal, it's really like at a federal level. It's not down to the state level, but in this case, your experience at the state level could actually help you answer the question, any question that you may see. You may see a question related to, states contracting with Medicaid managed care plans. If you're familiar with any of the insurances here in New York, MVP, CDPHP, Health First, Fidelis, these are all United Healthcare Community Plan. These are all big Medicaid HMOs that exist here in New York. So in this case, to know that it exists here in New York, then it would be a possible answer for a test question, if that makes sense.
Yep. And then for the eligibility, the individual must meet the income and asset requirements and fall into one of those major categories. So there's the categories there: children, individuals with disability, elderly, pregnant women, and adults in families with dependent children. And then Medicaid covers the following services. It will list those. So inpatient, outpatient hospital services, physician services, nursing home, pregnancy-related, et cetera.
And keep in mind, you really do need to check your Medicaid eligibility, because it is possible a patient may only have coverage for certain things. So it's possible that your patient may only have family planning service coverage for Medicaid. And if that's the case, it may not cover, a knee surgery. So you really have to not only confirm that they're eligible, but confirm that it'll cover the service that the patient wants or needs.
Right. A common one is like emergency services only. So if it's not an emergent service, it won't be covered. That's another situation as well. So specific billing rules: in addition to general guidelines, Medicaid has some specific billing rules that must be followed. So, So the form must include the patient's Medicaid case number. So that's their Medicaid number. It's usually their ID number. So that's what you would bill with. some persons are eligible for Medicaid only after they've incurred medical expenses that reduce their income, which is known as a spend down. The incurred spend down amounts are reflected on the 837 using a value code. Again, I don't know if you don't need to memorize that, just know it for reference. Medicaid only makes a payment for covered services after any other available third-party benefits are exhausted. So Medicaid payments are reduced to the extent that there are benefits available from any third party. So just think that Medicaid is most of the time the payer of last resort. So if you have Blue Cross and there's Blue Cross and Medicaid listed on the patient's account, Blue Cross would either have to deny it because the patient's not eligible, whatever the case is. Medicaid would never pay prior to Blue Cross. And claims for Medicaid recipients enrolled in a health maintenance organization, so an HMO program, are sent to the designated HMO carrier for payment, and HMO coverage criteria must be met. And more billing rules. So there are, and some of you may know this, but there are special required documentations that need to be submitted along with the claim for specific services such as induced abortion, sterilization, and hysterectomy services. Newborn bills must include birth weight, and state-specific requirements must be followed. Ay, 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 come on. Okay. On Tricare, right?
Tricare, yes.
Okay. So Tricare is for the Uniform Services Health Care Program for active duty service members and their families. And so Uniform Services, we'll click on that. Tricare for Uniform Services is Tricare brings together the healthcare resources of the uniformed services and supplements these resources with networks of civilian healthcare professionals, institutions, pharmacies, and suppliers. And this provides the service members access to high-quality healthcare services while maintaining the capability to support military operations. Tricare has their unique billing requirements. Tricare claims billed by means of standard billing requirements using the 837I for hospital services, and again, the 837P for professional. The beneficiary's liability is determined by the program option the patient's using. So emergency services are always billed separate from inpatient claims. Bills must be submitted for payment within 1 year of service or discharge, and if they're secondary, 90 days from primary payment. And Tricare deducts a 10% penalty if prior authorization is not obtained when it's required. And there are 3 types of Tricare plans that are available. So Tricare Prime is an HMO program where military treatment facilities are the principal source of health care with a point of service option, and the program covers active duty military and their families. So if you click each button, I'm not gonna
Yeah, these aren't important. Again, this is really getting down into the weeds. And to be honest, even registration systems for hospital, this is getting a little down into the weeds.
I've actually never seen any of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, you will see U.S. Family Health Plan. That's, you know,
that's the only
again,
one. Yeah.
it's kind of a Tricare HMO or whatever, but that does exist in New York. But, you know, Tricare, I mean, most of the time they go to VA facilities, so it's not something that we're super familiar with, although, you know, we do see them.
Yep.
Right. And then there's Tricare Standard and Extra. The most important thing is just to know which type of Tricare covers who, right? So this is a fee-for-service plan available to all non-active duty beneficiaries through the United States. And again, you could just read more about each one. And then Tricare for Life. So Tricare for Life is the Tricare supplement to the Medicare program. So this program is only available to Medicare eligible individuals who are also enrolled in Medicare A and B benefits. Next, other health plans. Apart from Medicare, Medicaid, and Tricare, patients also opt for other health plans. So here you have your managed care plans. I know we've gone through these. Some examples of managed care plans include your preferred provider organizations, health maintenance organizations, exclusive provider organizations, and point of service plans.
I think you somehow managed to jump again a little quick.
Oh my.
Yeah, no, it's okay. They started with Indian Health Service, which we already talked about, Department of Health and Human Services. They provide the services for our Native Americans.
Oh, you know why? Because I went through it when I was writing my notes, so it looks like I did it. That's why. Okay. So we did go through that. All right.
Yeah, I'm just checking this real quick. I'm not seeing anything that jumps out at me that's super critical to cover in this.
Yeah, I think the most important thing for these, and we're going to get more when we get into the managed care plans, like the next 2.5 section, it's going to go over all of this again, and that's really probably the more important part of it, but really just know what each of them is. Like know what the Indian Health Service is and who it covers. Same with the liability, to Christy's point, that's usually your workers' comp no fault, easy way to remember it.
Okay, Christina, so let me run through these because I'm kind of stuck with the guide. If I don't hit this card, it won't let me move. So the next one that it talks about is Blue Cross Blue Shield. Again, that's the nation's oldest, largest family of health benefit companies. I have seen that question where it will ask who is the oldest and largest company. So as far as I'm concerned, we could blame Blue Cross and Blue Shield for the state of the healthcare industry. One things to note with Blue Cross Blue Shield, they tend to have a prefix on their card. If you do not put that prefix in your system, if you do not include all of those letters of the prefix, I can guarantee you your claim will deny or reject. They touch on managed care plans. We cover this in extensive detail in chapter 2.5, so I am not going to cover it here. Commercial indemnity plans, they cover almost all services without authorization requirements, and normally without specific billing rules other than that they must come in on the standard forms. They usually reimburse a certain percentage of charge after the patient meets whatever their deductible is. So it could be an 80-20 split where the insurance will pay 80% and leaving 20% for the patient. And they may have a maximum that the patient's responsible for before the plan will pick up from there. Your self-insured plans, the cost of the medical care are borne by the employer. It's a pay-as-you-go basis. There is no true insurance per se. Your employer does get to determine what services are covered. These plans typically include a stop-loss provision. That is something you want to try to associate with a self-insured plan, is that stop-loss provision. The idea of that is to protect the employer from a catastrophic claim loss. So, for instance, if you have an employee who develops an aggressive form of cancer that requires significant treatment, chemo, those drugs can get rather expensive. They do have stop-loss provisions, which will help protect the employer from exorbitant claim costs. Your employer can contract with a third-party administrator for processing of claims. The rest of this isn't super important. I've recently heard that I think Walmart, which may be the largest employer in the States or one of the largest, is actually looking at bringing their company under a self-insured plan and providing those services. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with that.
Yeah, guess who will, they're going to have their own doctors. Amazon's doing it. They're going to have their own doctors. They're going to have their own clinics.
Wow.
And that's where you're going to go.
Yeah.
Because that's why if your hospital is a self-insured plan, which a lot of hospitals are, that's why they encourage you to go and have services at your own hospital. Because it doesn't sort of, go through. I mean, there's still a cost to it, but it's not the same as,
It's cheaper. It's cheaper for your hospital to do that. They could give you their service at cost, essentially. There's rules around governing self-funded plans. The main law that regulates this is known as ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. So again, you're going to want to associate ERISA with your self-insured plans. You have the state legislation that provides guidance for the coordination of benefits, determination for dependents based on the birthday rule.
Christy,
Okay.
we have a question.
Yeah.
It says, is this also called self-funded plan?
Yes. Yeah. Self-insured plans or self-funded plans. Yes.
Yes.
And Barbara, would you love to explain the birthday rule to everybody?
Oh my. Yeah. You know, a few years ago, everybody was like, which is primary, which isn't primary. And when you have a child and both parents are working and they've got plans, it was, you know, I mean, the old days, I hate to say this, you know, very un-PC, but, you know, it was the father, you know, insurance. Well, that's not true anymore. So it's the month of your birthday. So, okay, for example, my birthday's in December, my husband's birthday's in September. So if our kids were covered by both of our plans, his would be primary because 9 is before 12. So it's the month of the insured's birth date. You know, it doesn't get into the year or anything. It's just the month. And then that's who's primary if somebody's covered by both plans.
Yeah, it doesn't, they don't look at who's older. They just simply look at whose birthday comes first in the calendar year.
It's just the calendar month. 9 is before 12. That's it.
And then your liability coverage. Again, when you hear liability coverage, think no fault, think workers' comp. That could be your home insurance if somebody slips and falls on your property. Think that, you know, for your liability coverage, it is important. They're going to want to know the date of the accident or injury. They're going to want to know where it occurred. They're going to want to know who the responsible party is. You know, if there was a no-fault accident, they're going to want the insurance company. They're going to need to know the insurance company, that policy information. When it comes to liability claims, you have to include quite a bit of information. They're looking for condition codes, occurrence codes. Basically, the insurance company wants to know that they truly are responsible to pay it based on there being some kind of claim against insurance policy. Okay, so here when Christina said, you know, just know what your health plan and be able to identify it with the appropriate description. So nation's oldest and largest family of healthcare benefit companies. Again, I blame them for the insurance industry as it is, so I'm going to go with Blue Cross. Responsible for providing federal health services to our Native Americans. That's going to be your Indian Health Service. Attempt to reduce costs through contractual agreements with providers. That's going to be your managed care plans. The cost of medical care are borne by the employer, pay-as-you-go basis. That's your self-insured plans. And then the commercial indemnity plans cover almost all services without authorization requirements. So this is a nice screen with these answers. You may want to take a screen grab. I'll give you a second. And then submit it and it'll come up. Okay, so I think when we come back in 2 weeks, we will kick off with the managed care, chapter 2.5.
So you'll all get to hear me again.
Got to work on that computer, Christina.
Yeah, that's true.
All right. Well, everybody
have a
safe, healthy couple of weeks. Be careful out there. It's getting a little scary again.
Yep. And go out and vote. If you haven't voted yet, go out and vote.
Have a good night, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Night. Good night.